Hello, everyone. We're coming to you all with the next World Food Program USA Employee Spotlight. This time, we're focusing on gender equality in recognition of International Women's Day. My name is Jessamyn Sarmiento, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at World Food Program USA. Today, you're going to be hearing from me and our other female senior leadership team members, Rebecca Middleton, Gabriella Morris, and Katharine Emerson. So a key component of the work carried out by the United Nations World Food Program is putting women in positions of decision-making, whether it's giving them the tools and resources they need to support their families and communities, or putting them in positions of power to help guide World Food Program activities on the ground. Here at World Food Program USA, we see this value reflected in our leadership. Our organization is enhanced by women who are change makers in their field and are using their unique experiences to reach and connect with our US audiences. As women leaders, particularly in our positions at World Food Program USA, we're always thinking about the women and girls we serve. Women all over the world are heads of households, protecting and comforting families, but women often eat least and eat last. What can we do to help change those circumstances for women and girls? Well, today you're going to be hearing from us on this issue and more. So let's get started. So I'd like to ask each of you how you view gender equality as it relates to your area of interest and focus at World Food Program USA. And let's start with you, Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Jess. It's great to be having this conversation, and it's great to be a part of this team with other wonderful women leaders. So I do policy and advocacy, which is sharing the stories of World Food Program and the work they do with members of Congress and their staff. And one of the things that's important is to talk about the way women are helped and aided through this work, how they're put in positions of decision-making, positions of leadership, helping them to have agency in their communities as they're making decisions about food and livelihoods. I think it's also important to talk about the things that include men in these conversations. I think traditionally some of the work that's been done around gender equity has focused exclusively on women, but then by leaving men out of the conversation, it could unintentionally create some tensions. So it's been fun to watch that conversation evolve over the past decade or so, to realize that gender programming needs to be inclusive, but also inclusive in a way that helps women to assert themselves and lead in their communities.
Gabriella, how about you?
I'm going to second the profile that Rebecca has just given of our work. My responsibility leading the development team is to find partners who share our belief that women need our help. We're so proud of the over 60 million women that WFP has helped around the world as we help them combat cultural stigma, the effects of war, and other things that lead to these issues around hunger that you highlight. And we know that women leaders can change the world. So we're looking for those partners who want to correct a wrong, who believe in equity, who believe that women have a seat at the table and want to help us help them.
Hi, I'll echo everything that Gabrielle and Rebecca have already said. My role at WFP USA is more internally focused. So as chief of staff for the organization, I'm focused on working with our board and helping the team. So for me, it's a leading by example. So I think the fact that we're having this conversation and 4 of the senior leaders on the WFP USA team are women speaks to the leading by example and the focus that not only do we want to help women and girls broadly across the globe, but that we're acting on those beliefs as well internally.
That's so amazing what all of you have said. And I think as the Chief Marketing Officer, it's taken all of those things that you do every day and the stories of the people that we're working with on the ground in 88 countries around the world and telling those stories, really highlighting these stories of women, what they're doing and how WFP is supporting their efforts to support their families and their communities. That is so important to me to ensure that that we're being equitable in the stories that we're telling and that we're being truthful to the people who we're representing. That's very important to me. And, as a female, as a woman leader, it's really important to me that women have their stories told in a fair way.
So Gabriella, question for you. How have you seen gender equality progress in the workplace over the course of your career?
Wow, thank you for the question, Rebecca. For the sake of context, I will tell everyone I began my professional career as an attorney in 1980. So you might imagine that the world has changed a little bit in those years. I'm not going to tell you it was easy. In fact, it was not. Being in many cases one of just only a female in many situations, especially since I was a real estate lawyer. I have seen so much change from selection of career. Women do not seem fearful of any career they might choose because of gender, to just the way men interact with women in the workplace. I could tell you stories, but I won't. Suffice it to say, I think our profession, my former chosen profession, we've made great strides in recognizing not that just women are equal, but that women perform in the workplace regardless of their gender. So I'm happy to say 2022 looks a lot better.
You know, it's interesting because I started my career in Washington in 1997. And then in the early 2000s, I was a defense lobbyist. And similar to what you described, very often I was the only woman in the room and frequently was the youngest person in the room as well. But what I appreciated was that there was a seat for me at the table. And when folks realized I had a lot to contribute and a lot of knowledge that I could bring to the process or the decision making, it didn't matter that I was a woman. It didn't matter that I was, in some cases, 20 to 30 years younger than everyone else. I had agency. And I've tried to, throughout my career, create that space for other women as well, inviting them to the table. I think the other thing I've seen change a lot in the 25 years is there's a lot more openness and transparency and conversation around some of the challenges that working women, and particularly working mothers, have in the workplace. And it's really refreshing to be able to be open and honest in those conversations in a way that I think we all had to pretend wasn't happening even 10 or 15 years ago.
So Rebecca, that's a great reflection. And I would say the breakthrough in my profession came when partners at law firms saw that their daughters wanted to be lawyers. And they actually thought about the kind of environments they would be in and wanted to make some change. Because I always think, what is the difference? What is the change maker? And I think you've hit on something else. Once women became, members of that workspace, it was what they contributed. And I think that's really important when you prove yourself to be not just a woman at the table, but a contributing person at the table, regardless of your gender. Then I think we just ran through all of those barriers because we are indeed as competent.
I'll pop in. I think one of the things that both of you hit on that I think has been so important to me has been having strong women role models. Seeing really is believing. And so, I started my career probably 6 or 7 years after Rebecca did. So 2004, 2005, and just knowing that having that, I've seen these people before me do it. Sure, I can absolutely do it too, has been really, really helpful. And I would also say to give a pat on the back to the guys out there, I've had really strong male leaders who have helped me get where I am as well, and have recognized the value that having a diverse workforce can bring.
I might add to what you've said is I think early on in my career, identifying other female leaders who I could give opportunity to. And, I'm so proud that there are a handful of women who over the years I have kind of either brought along with me or, helped them get to where they are. And now they are, leaders in their own right, managing significant portfolios. And I think all of us have a responsibility to kind of helping other females as they kind of are growing through the ranks, to give them that seat that might not be available to them so that they can prove their, as Gabriel, as you said, to kind of prove that they have something to say that's worth hearing.
Well, it's so interesting, the sponsorship notion. Even Rebecca, in your remarks earlier, when you talk about gender equity, bringing men to the table, it really does take that village and sponsorship to move us all along. Thank you for noting that and the power of mentorship. I had a question for Jess that's really on point here. And it really is particularly about your career, Jess, your field, and how gender plays a role in sort of how you viewed it going through your career.
Well, it's been very interesting because the bulk of it has been here in Washington, D.C. And, it is a very heavily male dominated environment. And particularly in politics, where I got my start, that is also very male dominated. And, I learned a lot along the way throughout my different opportunities at different places that I was at. And some were hard lessons, some were easier. And I think what I learned is, you're right, sponsorship is really important. Finding the people who are going to help create that safe space for ideas and voices and perspectives to be heard. Because when you're in marketing and politics and news, it's a very, I don't want to say cutthroat, but a very urgent, driven environment. And a lot of times the loudest voices, or those with seemingly more authority, are the ones that get heard. And so you learn really quickly how to navigate that type of an environment. I think as you kind of rise up, go up the ladder in your career, you have to really reflect on how to use the authority that you've had to really push in certain environments, and kind of understand when to use it and when not to use it. Because I think as you grow in your career, the need to kind of be really forceful in that may wane a little bit, because your title is higher, you have more authority over the areas that you are responsible for. So it's an interesting reflection to think about the differences, and as a female, how you kind of portray yourself when you're at the table and what you need to do to be heard. And certainly in male dominated sectors, you have to learn different ways to communicate.
I'll jump in off of that a little bit. It's interesting. I sometimes joke that I'm the son my father never had, and that I was always the one sitting watching sports with him. And I found early in my career, again, this is late 90s, early 2000s, that when I was in these male dominated conversations, being able to just connect in on, March Madness or the Super Bowl, or, something that was sort of a common language, it was really helpful. There was also a trick that I've shared with other women who have used a similar one. If you're at a business dinner, ordering a beverage of choice that might not necessarily be what someone would assume you would order. In my case, it would be a bourbon on the rocks. You don't even have to drink the whole thing, but just it's figuring out how to, so some of these cultural clues, cultural entry points. I don't think that's as necessary in 2022 as it was in 2002. And a lot of us have talked about in our conversations already, being at the table or inviting somebody to the table. And I do see a lot more opportunity for women to step up, and women who are also taking their own agency and sitting at the table, putting themselves there and saying, I deserve to be here, not waiting to be invited. And I think that's a really important shift.
I love that, Rebecca. And I was just chuckling because, Jess, I was going to ask you to share the secret strategies for power at the table. And it just reminded me of the early days when the young lawyers, we used to wear, we were focused on being like the men, right? The little suit with the little bow tie, foulard pattern to imitate men, because we were overcoming stereotypes and we wanted to take the gender equation out of it. However, I have found on occasions that a Shirley Temple or a damsel in distress or, oh no, please don't curse in front of me, used to work in the good old days. So I dare say we've used very different tactics to get that attention, overcome stereotypes, or be heard. So I'm with you, Rebecca. Let's just not do that anymore and feel more of yourself. But I do think just thinking about how we present ourselves and for me, overcoming my baser instincts and personality to focus on the task at hand and use strategies instead. Important.
I think about some of the things that I did, the way that I approached situations to get in the door and a seat at the table. I'm not sure I would actually do now. I look back and I think about, the conversations I had and the marching in and the sitting down and and all of that. And not that I don't believe in it, but it's just, I think a lot has changed over the years in terms of how, as women, we have to force our way into the room. And look, I want to say that we're fortunate that our industry, our sector, might be a little bit different than some, and some are still, I think, a little bit harder in terms of the gender balance and the seats at the table and the voices that are listened to. But I do think that having those, as you call, sponsors along the way that are helping you navigate it and, teaching you the lessons or giving you the feedback to help you as you're kind of molding your personality for the boardroom, as they say, is really important. And I think all of us have enough years where we've been doing this, where we've learned a lot of lessons. We've made a lot of mistakes. We've taken it too far or not taken it far enough. I feel like we've kind of hit that happy medium, that balance where we're able to kind of understand what is necessary. And we happen to be in a great organization where, we are heard, and we do have a really strong opportunity to make impactful decisions that help people. And that's so wonderful to be here. And I think all of us agree that we want to make opportunities for more women to be in positions where they can make impactful decisions and, do things that are going to make a difference in the world.
Kind of adding to that, I think there is a lot to be said for, going back to earlier comments on seeing is believing. And as one of 4 girls, it never crossed my dad's mind that we wouldn't be able to do absolutely anything. And same with my mom. But, I think that the more people just innately feel that they can do anything, the more they will. And I think as you look through the different longevities that we've all had in our careers, thinking, Gabriella, back to you starting your career in 1980, to Rebecca, you in 1997, to me in 2004, and the acceptance of and the expectation that women are at the table in all of those, as time goes on, it's just greater and greater. And I think that's just a testament to all of these strong folks that are enabling the situation.
Well, you bring up a great point around this as we move to women that we're sponsoring and mentoring and working with today. What do you think, Kat? Are they just fearless? They have an assumption that no one questions the fact that they're women. Do you think the challenges still remain?
From the generation that's coming up behind us, Gen Z, I don't even know. I'm so impressed with the whole generation, men, women, everyone. I think the world is our oyster. No one's going to tell us what to do mentality is fascinating. And I don't totally have a grasp on it yet, but I think the fact that that is there means that we are making progress. I think we see it and people talk in those terms, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done industry by industry and certainly country by country. I think to say that the problem is fixed is not accurate, but I think that the amount of progress that has been made is really evident, and that it's clear that we're headed in the right direction.
I'm curious on that note, what you guys think. I mean, what is the thing that's missing in the workplace for the future generations of female leaders? Like, we've talked a lot about kind of what's there and how we've accessed it, but for those that are coming up behind us, what's missing that we want to help put into place so that they don't have to, overcome it?
I'll take this one to start. There's still so many barriers for childcare. And I think WFP USA has really been thoughtful in revisiting our maternity leave policy and paternity leave policy, and being more mindful of what a critical moment that is in a family's life, and how to give people the space to be able to do what they need to do as they welcome a new child into their homes. But you look at the barriers around childcare and the costs of childcare, and the financial stress that puts on families. I think that that's something as a country that we haven't really reconciled. And I think that is a challenge. You look at the number of people that dropped out of the workforce during COVID, and particularly women. And a lot of that, is the research is coming out, has to do with the burden of childcare and the cost of childcare, particularly with a lot of kids being home from school as well. So I don't think that's something that any one entity is going to solve on their own, but I think it's something that we really collectively need to think about as we go forward. If we want to not have to have people making the hard choices of, do I want to keep a job because it really is meaningful to me and is fulfilling, and I feel like I'm contributing in a really important way, but my family's losing money because of how much we're having to pay, to keep my children safe and cared for while work is taking place outside of the home. I think that's just a huge barrier and a huge gap.
I think that has been a huge impact on women globally in particular. I mean, we have a lot of social safety nets here in the US, whether they are working fully or actually helping people, is a totally another debate. But particularly in the countries where we're working, I think this idea of COVID and the impact that it's had on the economies, and particularly the gig economy where a lot of females were employed, these kind of ideas of how how we view kind of their place in society. So they're the mother, they're the wife, they're the household, organizer. They, in a lot of societies and countries, they are the breadwinner. They are doing all of this, and COVID certainly has impacted that negatively. And I'm curious, from you guys, how you think that's going to play out over time. We are certainly, as World Food Program, there to kind of help support a lot of these females, particularly now with COVID. Those numbers are going up, and it's now really focused a lot more on the middle class, people who previously were not facing questions about whether they're going to get their next meal or where they'll get their next meal. How do we, as in the roles that we have in the organization that we're in, what are some of the things we should be thinking about as we're thinking about those women who have been so impacted by COVID and all of the other things that are going on? You can go down the list. There's a lot of them.
That was a really tough question, Jess. Sometimes it's easier to think about making the world right for young people who are not yet into adulthood. But the best way to do that is through helping their mothers predominantly. So I think it just emboldens us to continue to fight for the places for women to succeed. So that's my perspective on it.
I think as I look at WFP's work, one of the places where it's very straightforward and direct to tell the story about how WFP helps advance women is in school feeding programs. WFP has amazing school feeding programs around the world, and certainly the education and feeding pieces hand in hand are really important. But part of what that does as well is it allows families to continue to send their girls to school. Very often, when there aren't those types of structures, girls won't go to school, the boys will go to school, and the girls won't. They'll stay home and they'll cook and they'll clean and they'll care for the younger children. But when there's an incentive of a meal for a girl to go to school, it gets them there and keeps them there, and it makes that decision much easier for a family. So I love the school feeding program. I love the US support for that through the McGovern-Dole International School Feeding Program. And I think it's just a really powerful, albeit subtle way to elevate women and elevate women's empowerment as the girls, and particularly into adolescence. So Kat, what is your professional advice for women like yourself looking to be leaders in the field? What would you tell someone, that you from 2006, if they walked into your office in 2022, what would your advice be to them?
Well, two things, and I would tell it to anyone, man, woman. I would say my best professional advice is build a network and maintain it. And that doesn't mean, call someone once a week, but, check in with people who every now and then, and you never know when you might, change your mind about what you want to do, which brings me to my next best piece of advice, at least in my perspective, is figure out what you don't want to do, because I think knowing what you don't want to do is just as important as what you do, and it can really help you filter things, and maybe not go down a long path that you don't actually want to go down. So I think building a network and maintaining it, and figuring out what you don't want to do.
I think that's great. As we've had this conversation, I've been reflecting on phenomenal mentor, friend, inspiration, Janet Shaffrin. She was the legislative director in the congressional office I worked in fresh out of college. And I'm a staff assistant doing a really tedious job of answering phones, greeting people when they come in, opening the mail back when that was still a thing. And I was chomping at the bit to not be on the front desk. And the first position that opened up after I got there was scheduler. I was like, okay, that's some more money. It's not sitting at the front desk. It's not answering the phones. And Janet, in her infinite wisdom, said, I know you really want to get out of the staff assistant position, but don't go in that direction. It's not what you want. It's not what you need. Just be patient a little bit more, and there'll be a legislative opening. When you're 22, a month feels like forever. And of course, shortly thereafter, there was a ledge position that opened up, and I've moved into that track, and that set me on the rest of my career. But having somebody say, I get this looks good, but this isn't going to take you where you want to go. I think I've been so grateful for those conversations with men and women throughout my career.
I would like to add that if you find yourself in a position that, oops, I didn't realize I didn't want to do that, do a great job. You won't get the next job if you didn't do a great job with the last job. Having said that, I just want to take a moment to really, I would say, shout out the women in development, because they are fearless, they're ambitious, they're proactive. I know we will see great things from them in the future. So I just want to say how fortunate we are to have a bunch of great women who they're really fearless in a way that I can't say 1980 looked to me. Whether they're assuming that the world will lay out the red carpet for them, or whether they're just taking it. Stand your ground, and they're all going to have fabulous careers.
I would say, break some rules, color outside the lines, don't adhere to what others say, either your role or your thinking should be. I think the best opportunities come when you take a chance. And I think, it's possible sometimes as females, we want to play it safe. You don't want to stick out. I would say do the opposite. If you're starting your career, whether the risk is the choice in what you're going to do, what you're going to say, the perspectives that you have, they're so important. And that's the first piece of advice I give to anybody who I'm talking to is, be a rule breaker, be a risk taker.
It sounds like we all were.
It does. You guys are great.
I think that's really important, because, just because something's been done one way and it's worked doesn't mean there aren't other ways of doing it just as effectively, if not maybe more. So I think thinking again and recalibrating and trying something new differently is always really important to think about.
And if you get smacked down, just keep doing it. Don't give up.
But I'll say, Gabriella, I mean, obviously things have worked out really well, and I'm so thrilled to be where I am in my career. But as I look back on 25 years, I think sometimes I've played it too safe. You want to do things the right way. You want to follow the rules. I think that's something as a Gen X, someone who identifies as female, I think that's something that carries through from the 70s and 80s. And if I had to go back and talk to myself at 22, I would say take more risks.
But I would also say, to me, the women's movement was about having choices. May want to focus on my family, and I might want to also have a career. I heard some advice that women, you can have everything, but maybe not all at the same time. So this is all a journey. And, some things are right for you at some times, and other times you might take that leap to be a difference maker, a change maker. But there's nothing wrong with being an amazing contributor and achieving success in many different ways. So it's all about choices as well.
Thank you so much for joining us today, hearing from the female leaders at World Food Program USA. I hope we've inspired you, particularly to join us in our fight to end global hunger, and in the process of doing so, promote global gender equality and women empowerment. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great International Women's Day and month and year.